I want to start with what we saw today in Russia, because we are actually witnessing the new phase of escalation. Today, Russia ratified the legal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. And as far as I understand, the world must show some response to it. And as far as I understand, the world has not so many instruments to demonstrate its reaction. And for us Ukrainians, we think that the most effective instrument now is to provide more weapons to Ukraine. And that is why here in Ukraine, our first question, of course, would be if the world and if the United States are ready to provide more weapons to Ukraine, for we could fight that threat and for we could address that new phase of escalation.
Well, the answer is yes. We just voted last week to provide an additional $12.4 billion in aid to Ukraine in the Congress in a bipartisan fashion. The president signed the legislation that provides that funding, $7.5 billion for military equipment, supplies, training, and intelligence support, an additional $4.5 billion for economic and humanitarian aid, and $35 million to respond to potential nuclear or radiological incidents, as Russia has threatened not only with use of tactical weapons, but also with the nuclear power plants that are producing electricity in Ukraine. So we and our NATO allies are providing additional military and economic support to Ukraine, and the brave Ukrainian people have responded incredibly over the last 7 months. Furthermore, the fraud elections that Russia held in the 4 provinces in eastern Ukraine, and Putin's subsequent action to indicate that somehow those elections were valid, and then announcing the annexation to Russia, forevermore Russia, was denounced by Congress. It was denounced by President Biden. It was denounced by the European Union. Outside of North Korea, I'm not sure that any other country has accepted this fraudulent election and annexation. Putin is desperate, and his actions over the last week have, I think, reflected that desperation that we see as the Ukraine military continues to pursue advances on the eastern provinces, and now their efforts going south. So obviously these are very, very difficult times, but we have been working together, the United States and Ukraine and our Western allies. And I think we cannot say with enough respect how proud we are of the Ukrainian people. 3 weeks ago, I went to Ukraine, and I spent 2 days in Kiev at the Yalta European Strategic Conference. When we got in on the train into Kiev, we went straight to Bushka and saw the indiscriminate killing and the burial grave of 166 individuals, mainly women and children. The attack that Russia had in March gone as close to Kiev center as Bushka, and indiscriminate bombings of homes, apartments, and schools. The brutality that I think resulted in much of the world, in a speech I gave in April on the House floor, calling President Putin for what I believe he is, a war criminal. He's a war criminal and should be held accountable for the atrocities that he has placed on innocent women, children, men, women, and children in Ukraine. That has been devastating, and the world will never forget, and nor we should ever forgive President Putin for his criminal actions in this war.
Could you explain us the concept of the Lend-lease for Ukraine? Because here in Ukraine, there are still a lot of questions about it, and people are asking, where is Lend-lease?
Well, it's in the process of being implemented. And the Lend-lease is a mechanism that allows us to provide more military assistance in terms that will allow Ukraine, after the war is ended, and the war must end, and we hope sooner than later, and we hope with the brave fighting by the Ukrainian military, the men and women and the intelligence agencies that have proven every day their ability to repel the Russian forces, even though they are in many ways outnumbered, and Russia has in many ways far more military equipment. But what Ukraine has done has shown that they've taken on supposedly the second largest military force in the world, and they've beaten them back badly. And I think that will only continue as long as we in the United States and our NATO allies provide Ukraine with the support they need to finish this war. What will happen here in terms of Russia's reaction as they get more desperate, we're very concerned about. And we should all be concerned about what happens when you have a Putin who has no checks and balances to his rule. He's a dictator, and he therefore takes his actions on his own. How we ultimately bring this to some sort of a negotiated settlement is what we're trying to do. But the Lend-lease gives another tool for Ukraine to get the weapons it needs, and over a period of time when the war is over, to then be able to pay that back. But right now, what's most important, I think, for those of us who support Ukraine's efforts, is to provide all the necessary means to ensure that Ukraine wins this war.
When you see and when you hear all those news about partial mobilization, do you think that those resources that the West and the United States provide Ukraine at the moment, it is enough to withstand all those 200,000 soldiers that Russia is going to bring here to Ukraine?
Well, I doubt the credibility of 200,000 soldiers, given the reaction that's taken place in Russia in the last week. People are fleeing; they're leaving the country, and you don't bring 200,000 people together. They're not capable of supporting 200,000 new soldiers. They can't support the military that's on the field now. And you try to send people in there who have no training, who have no background or experience, and they become the English word that we use. I don't know. You can translate in Ukrainian, but they become cannon fodder. They're not capable of being a legitimate, organized military army. You don't bring civilians off the street. You give them a day of training, and you put a gun in their hand and expect that they're going to be able to perform. The trained military that Russia has today, we see fleeing day after day with the advances that the Ukrainians are making, abandoning tanks and armor personnel carrier and weapons that fall into the hands of the Ukrainian army, in which they use against Russia's own military equipment. So I think that once again, and Putin has tried to make statements in the last week to limit the alarm of Russian people about how they will conscript 200,000 soldiers. But there is great division in Russia today that normally you would not see taking place because of how badly this war has gone for Russia.
I don't know if you have the answer, but I want to ask you. We here in Ukraine are waiting for a decision to provide Ukraine with fighter jets, with Abrams tanks, and with long-range HIMARSs. If you know, can you tell us, will it happen, and when, if yes?
Let me just say this. President Zelensky and the Minister of Defense and his government have requested all the possible support that we in the United States and in the West can provide. And I think we have listened. There are daily, if not weekly, conversations going on between the United States Department of Defense and Secretary Austin and the Ukraine Minister of Defense. There is daily, if not weekly, conversations going on between President Zelensky's government and President Zelensky and President Biden. And we continue to provide more and more advanced weapons to Ukraine, and they have an incredible capacity to use them effectively, from the javelins to the HIMARS system to others. Certainly, there's been a request for F-16s. I think that makes sense. There are other weapons that, with modifications and with guarantees, most recently as yesterday, that President Zelensky has requested. They are being evaluated. But every time Ukraine has asked for additional assistance and more advanced weaponry, we have responded in ways that have allowed the Ukraine military to be more and more effective. And we see that being proven every day out on the battlefield. When these other requests may be responded to and in what fashion, I cannot tell you. But I know everything is being considered.
Russian nuclear threats, do you in person take it serious, or do you think Putin is blackmailing?
I think both. I think we have to take it seriously, and I think he's also trying to blackmail and threaten because he is desperate and because his army is not performing. His generals are not performing. They have lost an incredible amount of soldiers, and over 17 generals at the last count that I know of. The military leader in the southern region has been replaced as of yesterday, the Russian leader, military leader. And so he's seen his all the money he spent over the last 20 years on military hardware and building up his army falling apart. And so, of course, he's going to talk, and he has now for several months, about his potential use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield. So we must take it seriously. We have warned Putin that would create serious and grave response on behalf of the United States and the West. And I think that that is not a bluff, because everything we've told Putin that we would do to support Ukraine, we have done. And so, and then, I am told by our military experts, God forbid, if he decided to try to deploy a tactical nuclear weapon, they are hard to deploy, they are difficult to use, and I think the consequences for Russia, if they made that step, would be the most serious blunder that Putin will have made so far during this war that he cannot win.
I mean, if Putin actually tries to use nuclear to realize his nuclear threat, if he tries to do it, what would be the response? Do you understand?
Yes, I do, but I'm not privy to state it at this time. But it would be in the most serious terms and consequences for Putin and for Russia. He is already a pariah, a war criminal, as he's looked upon by the rest of the world. Russia has lost so much as a result of this unprovoked war that it will take years for them to try to reconstitute their standing in the world. No one will trust Russia. No one will trust Putin. And the military is in significant division, because their weakness and their corruption have become clear to the rest of the world. And the oligarchs who Putin has made wealthy now see all of that wealth being evaporated by the sanctions, by withholding by Western interests, their luxury yachts, their properties. And this has all been, I think, something that Putin, at the end of the day, I will be surprised over the long term that he'll be able to survive the impacts of the outcomes to Russia as a result of his invasion of Ukraine.
And I have a question about Ukraine's NATO membership. Last week, Ukraine applied for NATO membership after Russia annexed our territories. I want to ask you, what's your personal attitude to this, and what about official position of the United States? Can it change some way the coming months into the for a strong support of Ukrainian aspirations?
Well, I believe that Ukraine is a part of Europe, and its application for the European Union is being fast-tracked, and I hope that sooner than later there are various steps that Ukraine has to go through before the European Union determines acceptance. Becoming a part of NATO is a logical step in that sense. 9 NATO countries, as of this week, have indicated that they would be willing to accept Ukraine as a part of NATO. But NATO, like other organizations that we belong to, works on consensus. And so you have to have consensus of all 30 countries. When Putin invaded Ukraine, we never thought that Finland and Sweden would become a part of NATO. It was Putin's worst nightmare. He had threatened NATO if, in fact, Finland and Sweden became a part of it. There's over an 800-mile border between Finland and Russia. Yet, as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the public opinion moved dramatically in Finland and Sweden. Both countries sought to become a part of NATO. There had to be negotiations that took place, especially with Turkey and Hungary to some extent. But that process has gone forward, and now we see NATO stronger than ever before. I would view a similar process that would have to take place for Ukraine's membership to NATO. And what is obviously different in this case is that Ukraine is in the middle of a war with Russia, and Article 5 is a critical part of NATO membership. Article 5, for your viewers who are not familiar, and I know you are, is, and President Biden has said this numerous times, if one NATO country is attacked, it's an attack on all NATO countries. So clearly, it is a good start for 9 NATO countries to begin that process of willing to accept Ukraine as a part of NATO. But there are 30 countries in NATO, and obviously consensus is not there yet at this point in time. And certainly I suspect a number of the countries would be concerned about if Ukraine were to become a part of NATO, would Article 5 go into effect immediately? At this point in time, NATO countries are strongly supporting Ukraine. But, Putin has already said that this war is not between Russia and Ukraine, but he's now redefined, initially this was a special mission to root out Nazis in Ukraine. And of course, Putin has changed that narrative now to reclaim provinces that were formerly a part of Russia. Now he's saying that, in fact, this is really Russia's fight for salvation against the United States and the NATO aggressors that want to destroy Russia. So you can follow how Putin has changed his narrative over the last 7 months. And so all of this goes into account as to ultimately whether or not NATO membership can happen for Ukraine in the near term. But I think in the long term, when this war is over, I personally think that it would make sense for Ukraine to become a part of NATO.
And my last question will be, how long the United States can support Ukraine? What's your feeling? We don't know how long the war would go on. And do you believe that the United States are ready to support Ukraine as long as it would be necessary?
Well, that's a good question. When I was in Kiev 3 weeks ago, I was on a panel that spoke directly about potential for what people call Ukraine fatigue in the United States, in Europe, among the Western allies that are supporting Ukraine today. I will tell you what I said then. The public opinion polls, and in democracies, you have to have support of the people to continue a policy, but over 70% of the people of the United States continue to support U.S. Military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Not only do more than 70% of Americans support that continued financial assistance, but we continue to see now this is the third action by the Congress that we voted on last week in a bipartisan fashion that provided another $12.4 billion to Ukraine, $7.5 billion for military assistance, 4.5 for economic and humanitarian assistance, and other efforts. So clearly the support continues to be there. I think the support continues to be there in Europe. We've seen Russia sabotage the 2 gas pipelines to Europe, Nord Stream 1 and 2. I've told many of my European friends over the years that it was a mistake to become dependent upon Russia for oil and gas. And now they're learning that lesson the hard way. And the only new pipeline in the Baltic is the one that Poland and Norway have completed. And but we have to be concerned that Russia may attempt to sabotage that pipeline, as they have, I believe, Nord Stream 1 and 2. We don't have the evidence at hand, but American military and our NATO allies are doing the due diligence to determine who was responsible for the sabotage of those 2 important gas lines to Europe. But it just proves again how bad Russia is, and to what lengths they will go to. They are not, I think, in the family of nations that that we think are critical and no longer are responsible. They're a pariah state, like North Korea, and they should be treated as such.
I agree with you in full. Thank you for your time, Congressman Costa, and thank you for all those efforts you take to support Ukraine. I know that you are supporting Ukraine from the very February and even earlier, even before that. So I thank you for all you've done for Ukraine.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think it's important for the Ukrainian people and its government to acknowledge that, because this is the test of our time. I say this every opportunity I have. This is whether or not democracies will continue to stand together. We are being tested, and what we did when Russia moved on Georgia, when they engaged in Chechnya, when they took over Crimea and got a slap on the hand. All of these actions over the last 14 years, I think, enabled Putin to think he could move and take over Ukraine and install his own government, and the West would turn its back. But we haven't. We've understood today is the test of our time, and we're in this together. And historians will judge 20 years from now whether or not we made the right choices or not. I pray to God that they will determine that we stood together as democratic nations, supporting the rule of law, the freedoms that we cherish, and human rights, which clearly the dictator Putin does not support. And so it's why it's so important that Ukraine win this war, and that anybody who thinks that they can challenge democratic nations around the world needs to understand the lesson that I think lessons that will come from this unprovoked conflict, and that's why we must be together.
I do believe that we will overcome. Thank you once again for your time and for your thoughts.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.